Jon, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be back with you.
This has been a really awesome series. I haven't done anything like this yet on the podcast where it's just sort of built on each other. There's different episodes, especially we do some Q&A a lot of times in the beginning where you can sort of pop in on an episode and maybe not have to listen to everything. But my suggestion for people listening, whether it's your first time or if you've seen a few episodes, is to listen to all of it. These are such valuable tools that Jon's giving us. And this education, a lot of people won't touch, much less present publicly on. So you guys get to learn some really groundbreaking information that is really hard to come by otherwise. So go watch all of it.
Okay, so picking up where we left off. And again, this is going to sort of be free flowing so people know it's not scripted. It's good. It's good. It's a good opportunity for me to be able to let my thoughts coalesce. Okay, we are looking at and have been looking at, so I encourage people to go back to the past few episodes because we're looking at what amounts to, okay, there we go. Really what amounts to the overall internal system. I'm going to leave a little white there so I can grab it. So let me decrease this view right there, okay? What I would say about this chart is this is applicable. This really describes the worst case scenario. Okay, so regardless of what you've been through, if you've been through, the more you've been through, the more this is going to apply. So the most extreme SRA or MK Ultra, this is what you're dealing with. Anything less than this, you'll deal with a variation of it. So the reason why in creating a chart like this, whether for therapists, so hopefully this is helpful for a therapist to know that, okay, what's the goal? Ultimately, to get to know all these different parts and to help the primary person get to know their parts and to help the parts get to know the parts and then to be able to proceed down to, and you see on the bottom, we'll do that. There you go. See the core person? That's the part of them that became wounded early on. And you want to be able to help that core part begin to heal. Now, there's different perspectives. What helped them mature in terms of age and stage? That's a good question. What about the concept the child within? So I think there's a part of us that was never designed to grow, to stay very childlike. It's different than childish, by the way. Okay. So what you have in front of you is really what amounts to layers of self. Okay, and the middle layer, the red layer, is the part that keeps that which is below and that which is above, keeps them separate. So those are the hardest working parts. So we've got to give them a lot of credit, and eventually I will introduce you to those. Okay. IFS, again, I strongly recommend internal family systems. It's one way of conceptualizing what takes place. And they will speak in terms of, so my little cursor is circling here. They talk in terms of the managers. That's the everyday part of me or parts that help keep me functional. So they are helping to manage my life. You see the firefighters down here. Those are the ones that keep the present and the past, the pain of the parts that keep the memories, keeping them separate so that things don't get disrupted in the present. And then the IFS will call these exiles. These are the very young wounded parts. So look at a glance. You have a chart that shows here the different gradations of blue. Those are going to be your everyday life. Then as you begin to do the work necessary, you're going to encounter and this is really the greatest struggle in here because the strongest parts of you are in the red. Now, that's not to say that the wounded parts are not, but these are the parts that are trying to keep the dam from bursting. Now, I don't necessarily believe the dam's going to burst, but that's what it will feel like. Okay, so we're heading on a journey. It's like drilling for oil. We're going to begin the process of moving downward. But while that happens, as as a therapist, for instance, so my comments to other therapists, my encouragement is as you're getting to know your client, what'll happen is as the extent to which the trust is being built, it almost gives an opportunity. Two things going to happen. Little shafts of hope, shafts of light will start to come down to the darkest areas, meaning those parts that have been secluded, those parts that have been cut off, have been walled off, have been celled off like a little prison cell. So shafts of light will begin to shine down there. Also, another dynamic, another way to view this is the little parts will start to sense some hope. And what they'll do is in order to ultimately help the little core part, they want the story to be told. They want people to know what's happening because for these little parts down here in the green, they're in a time capsule, as it were. Okay, they've been sealed away. And so for them, time has stood still. I used the analogy previously that after World War II on the island of the Philippines, it was not uncommon to find, a year, 2 years, three later on, a cave that was still manned by a Japanese soldier who came out ready to defend his territory or the radio equipment that he had, because the last order given was don't come out of that without, unless direct orders. So he had been dutifully remaining in the dark, staying at his post for an extended period of time, long after the war had been over. So it's very similar. So the last thing these parts knew is that the war, really the perpetrators, are still there. So they have been sealed away. It's a little time capsule. They don't know that time has marched on. Okay, so, and they are parts that split off. So these are young parts as well, which means developmentally, they reason like kids. They have the feelings and emotions of kids. I'm not saying they shouldn't, meaning they have very raw and intense emotions. They haven't been suppressed as far as they themselves don't suppress their emotions. That's probably fair to say. The reason why I'm grabbing this little green one right here, right? We called her Tina before, is there will always be a part, a very young part, in the worst case scenarios. So that is, if somebody was subjected to a willful, strategic sadist, and having worked in prison with some of the worst, I have worked with men in prison with predators who have been arrested for torture or child trafficking. Now, on their jacket, so to speak, what they call jacket, on their files, will it say this guy was a satanic ritual abuser of kids? You tell me. Of course not. Nobody gets arrested for satanic ritual abuse. They get arrested for what? The possession and distribution of child pornography, the manufacturing of that, child trafficking, multiple counts of sadistic child abuse. Okay. Now the question is, were there any other people involved? And yes. Okay, so factually, I can tell you, the worse a perpetrator gets, the more he's able to do heinous things. Look at Jeffrey Epstein. But we don't read about, although probably wouldn't surprise me, were there any infants on his island? Don't know. But once somebody enters the realm of evil, as far as a perpetrator, what's he capable of doing? Well, unless you worked in a prison, I guess you could say, well, there's a threshold beyond which no self-respecting perpetrator wouldn't stoop so low so as to harm it. Well, you don't know then. Meaning you don't know what perpetrators are like. Okay, so unless you've worked in a prison and read through criminal history, thousands of them, right? And it doesn't even take that. You can go online, just Google or do an internet search and put in certain keywords, right? Say ritualistic abuse or sadistic abuse, right? Also bestiality, because those are going to be paired. Because by the time a perpetrator has gotten into child pornography, and it's not plausible to think somebody into child pornography is not going to be acting upon it, inevitably you're going to find in the stash of child pornography, you're going to find bestiality. So a perp that has gotten into harming kids prior to that will torture animals, not like a wounded child, a child that's been perped on can end up hurting animals, but that's different. We're talking adults, okay, and the very methodical and sadistic kind. Okay, so the people that get off on seeing animals hurt, you will, again, inevitably, you're going to find that within those that are harming kids. And then the question is how, to what extent? And by the way, that's why if you know of anybody into furries, you need to be very careful because that's the most deviant of all activities. I had furries themselves, individuals that are into, the mascot-like costumes that talk about how that's the most effective method of accessing kids. So you have a lot of really deviant individuals. It's just chocked full of them, especially the men, right? There are some women that are into it because it's a little social thing, but virtually every man that goes into furries is deviant. And they're looking for kids. That's why they promote, right? They want kids. They market to kids. Okay, so we're going to go back to Tina here. So what happens is when two things, when there's the hope of the possibility of finally being able to disclose, that starts to pull, as it were, Tina. We're just going to give her the name Tina, the little 6-year-old. That's almost like magnetic attraction. It's pulling Tina up because on the surface is where there's emotional oxygen. There's hope up there. She's been kind of drowning metaphorically. So finally, she's been stuffed away in a dark cave. And so there's a little shaft of light and she wants to follow to finally get up. Okay. Because the secrets are killing her. They're killing everybody. Actually, she's most concerned about the core person there. But she's also concerned about other parts that are being abused. So she wants the abuse to stop. She wants to tell big people what's happening, right? Because they feel like it's still happening. The other thing that will bring Tina up is the nature of the therapeutic relationship. So if you end up having a therapist that you trust, then by nature, then somebody who is trustworthy and somebody that believes, that is, in a good way, it sounds funny, intoxicating. Okay, now let me qualify that, meaning it will pull, it's like drawing salve. That's a pretty good analogy, right? It will draw the little parts out. So the little parts will be compelled as they sense there's hope. They sense there's some daylight up there. They're going to move through there. And what they end up doing, and Frank Anderson and Dick Schwartz, right, from IFS, they'll say it's storming the gates. That's not a bad phrase. What I say, it's almost like football and finding a hole. They're making it, they're zigzagging through and they make it up. So whatever term you want to use, what it means is that there's a little one who made it past these levels of defense. So these parts that are dedicated to making sure that nobody gets past what? This level of defendedness so that nothing surfaces. And nothing surfaces to our awareness, to the survivor's awareness. Okay, so that's that internal dynamic. So as you're doing therapy, if you're the survivor, what you're probably going to start to sense is, in a way, you're going to go through a time where it's going to start to seem, and you're going to experience things that start to become chaotic. Now, let me qualify that a little bit. Okay. It's going to feel like things are getting out of control. In a way, just know that you're on the right trail then. You're on the right trail. Things are under control because they're starting to get out of control. Now, let me qualify that as well. That's different than self-injurious behavior kind of out of control because that can become lethal. Okay. When that starts to happen, what level are you dealing with? Now you're dealing with, here's the self-harm. Okay. So that self-harm, that part is going to start self-harming for probably a couple of reasons, but that's different than our little Tina down here. Okay. So ultimately, how you prevent the self-harm may sound funny. How do I prevent that if I'm a therapist or if I'm the client themselves? The only way to decrease the intensity is ultimately through communication. So that is a top-down process. Okay. So as Tina is wanting to come to the surface, if it starts happening too soon, now how do I define that? Good question. Right? Because I want them to come to the surface, but at the same time, that's why I'm against, I got to be careful with, I'm just against hypnosis. Because if Tina, through hypnosis, is allowed to, so everybody else, all these other parts now are hypnotized, right? Suddenly relax, then now I'm able to have Tina come up. What happens if it's too soon? What happens if these parts aren't ready for it? And they're not ready for it if these parts aren't ready for it. And so I can overwhelm the system prematurely. So I'd much rather have Tina come up on her own so this is sort of the pacing. So that for those of you therapists that are listening to this, if you have a young part come up and start to disclose, on the one hand, it's a compliment to you. On the other hand, you need to be mindful that if you haven't had a chance to check in with, and Frank Anderson does a nice job, what he talks about is we need to be given permission from these. I agree. However, not at the expense of Tina. Okay. And what's also interesting is this. I'm convinced that this is very interesting. I'm thinking this through on some level, because eventually you're gonna get to meet these. Okay. And the most important one, or some of the most important ones, the one that's ultimately calling all the shots, and there's a lot of descriptor. At some point in time, we'll read all of that. Okay. But this is the one that is the ultimate gatekeeper. Another very powerful part is the self-harm part. That's these two, as a matter of fact, I'm sorry, the gatekeeper and the self-harm part usually are very closely associated. Okay, this is the self-destructive part. I think it's safe to say that in a strange sort of way, if they weren't ready, they won't believe they're ready and they won't even phrase it that way. But if Tina is able to bypass that, then I know two things. It's going to create disruption down there. So it increases the likelihood, by the way, of self-harm. Okay. So I need to be able to speak to that as a therapist. The reality is if Tina comes up, then it's reverberating all the way up. Oh gosh, what happened to her? Oh, that part. Okay, well, straighten that part out. Okay. But the self-harm part is going into damage control mode because it's reverberating, because ultimately what's happening is truth is starting to get to the surface, and the truth is starting to erode the defenses. So they'll go into damage control mode. Therefore, it's important as you're working with the entire system to know that your goal isn't to go from the surface, so this is the primary person that's walking into session, isn't to all of a sudden get to the littles, or, they're called, different people call them different little ones, right? The children, the littles. Okay. That's not the initial goal. Okay. Now, if they choose to come up, and oftentimes they will come up sooner rather than later, but your goal is to start to get to know from the top down these different levels so that they can begin to trust you, because if and when the little one comes to the surface, it's going to shake things up, especially because of what's going to be disclosed. Because there is a healthy sense of denial in here. And if you're forcing those to listen to things that are too soon, now, when is it ever right? But if it literally too soon, and that I think is premature, meaning it's premature in the sense of too early in therapy, because maybe they don't still trust the therapeutic process. They don't trust the relationship yet. They don't trust the therapist knows what they're doing because it will feel like all hell's going to break loose. If there has been, and again, we use the term programming. I know I say I don't really like that. I don't have a problem with it. I just want people to understand that it's not programming like you do to a computer. Okay. It is unduly influencing. It is persuading. Okay. So the reality is, if you're a survivor, you haven't been programmed so much as part of you is really persuaded what is true. Okay, now, so if it's programmed, then all you can do is, I mean, you can't do anything about it, right? Unless you're a better deprogrammer. Okay, so it's not like sitting down at a keyboard and programming something. What it means is these different parts are 100% persuaded, not because they're stupid or dumb or naive or anything, or like they don't get it. They just know what they know. And they're not stupid. But unless they have alternative information with which to process the pros and cons, true versus false, then all they have to go with is what they know. So just because they don't agree, one comes up and it says, I don't believe that didn't happen. Okay, I'm not going to tell them. I'm not going to force them to look at it. I'm just going to present information that they themselves even know. So whether the nature of the relationship of a perpetrator, as a matter of fact, I spoke to somebody today. She said this, well, I know my dad was really narcissistic, but he loved God and he loved his family. And I said, hold on. So those are kind of contradictory. And so a little piece of truth, right? A little drop of truth sunk in because it stopped her. And so a part of her then was able to begin to compare and contrast without me making commentary. Okay, and that's why I believe it's really important to just be very methodical about the process. Okay, so there's the whole picture right there. Okay, so as a therapist, your goal is you're going from you're drilling for oil, we're eventually going down. Okay, if you're a client, your journey will be you're going to get to know yourself. Now, does this mean you're going to have, if you counted these up, if you're normal, you probably counted all these up. I forget how many boxes or how many parts. No, it's just the more severe, like this is the most severe of sadistic abuse or MK Ultra. Now, each of these can represent 5 or 10, right? Variations of that. So there can be quite a few. Okay. I just listened to a really well-known person that deals with DID, and he just felt maybe 16 would be the max. That's not true. Okay. And as a matter of fact, each part will have its own style of handwriting. Okay, and it'll be very consistent. So that's why I recommend also do journaling. And if you can have 2 journals, then you can give one to your therapist if they're willing to do this. And so if finally one of these parts, so let's say right here, the spiritual guilty part finally journaled for the very first time. So you hand that journal to the therapist. Now the therapist has the one and only sample of, let's call her Melinda. Okay, let's say the spiritual guilty part is Melinda. So Melinda finally comes out and talks. And if you've been with us, you'll remember that it's not so much that the primary person, oh, where did my names go? You know what? As we're talking here, let me bring up, because I think I had the one with names on it. So my apologies. We're going to bring up a second one here. As a matter of fact, I know I had one. So let me find out here. Master system. Okay. Well, this will be helpful. So now we're going to go back to the one that we had names on. I may have to get out of this and come back in.
No
So
problem.
Emma, any questions? Yeah, you know what? I'm probably going to have to. Oh, there. Let me go to the one with names. Okay, so the one we just did that you aired has names. So I'm going to get out of this, and just as quickly, we're going to go right back into the one with names.
Perfect.
Wait a second. I remember. Okay, so there we go. So again, you saw the entire lay of the land, so to speak. now this is where we ended it, right? So we gave names last time to these parts. It's a lot easier. And what I mentioned last time was there's going to be subsections that within these different parts, they may or may not know the others. They may or may not get along with the others. And that's why they're sort of, they keep each other at arm's length or they're walled off. And Emma, any questions? Not that you have to. I know I can just keep talking and talking.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm excited to get to this next part too. This has been really neat building on this.
Okay. Okay. I think I left somewhere in mid sentence, but that's okay. I'll eventually remember if you remember. Ask away. So, again, when you start therapy, oh, I know. So we did the guilty one. There we go. Okay. I called her Carrie. So that's where we went. So let's say Carrie, I think I called her Belinda, but we're going to go with this. Oh, there's Belinda right there. Okay. But we're going to call her Carrie. So the spiritual guilty one, the reason I named her Carrie is, let's say with sadistic abuse, SRA, that probably a perp, actually not probably, this is what they do. So think about the movie Carrie. So they're helping to create additional parts, put them under trauma. You can even do it while you show the kid the movie Carrie, and then you tell the child that they are the spawn of Satan or they're the bride of Satan now. You show that movie, you're gang raping them, and okay. So now Carrie has spiritual guilt. We'll just say that that's part of what the issue is. She wants to be spiritual, but she believes either wrongfully or rightfully that, let's say, she had to participate in sacrificial stuff. So now she has all this spiritual guilt. They may also have shown different videos of natural disasters, or in LA, you have the Santa Ana winds. So if you're a little kid and somebody tells you the Santa Ana winds are blowing and they only blow when there's information that Satan needs to tell us about you, if you say the word Santa Ana, which means Saint Anna, if you say it fast enough, it can sound like Santana or Satan winds. So one of the clients I worked with, whenever the Santa Ana winds in Southern California during the winter time when all the fires happen in the mountains, because of the bowl-like effect that comes into Southern California, the dry air. So Carrie came into session one day, or it started with Mary, and before I knew it, Carrie came out, and what happens is Carrie will pull Mary in. So again, just for the dynamic of working with the parts and for a therapist, hopefully this will be helpful. I used to think that the primary presenting part used to go away. Now, I think what is true, but this is still worth each person because ultimately, each of you that have parts, you're the resident expert, to be honest. Okay. But I really think now the dynamic is not so much that Mary goes away, which would be this. So let's say the Santa Ana winds are blowing. Let's say Carrie, whose mother and stepfather were Satanists. I believe Anton LaVey was a part of that group, Uncle Anton. So instead of what I used to believe, it got too much. So Mary comes into session, her hair is all blown because of the Santa Ana winds. Well, what do you think has been triggered? We've got Carrie, that a lot of her was triggered, but Carrie is just under the surface vibrating because why? She knows that Satan is taking information about Mary's thoughts and delivering them through the wind to, that's right, to the organization. Okay, so Mary's agitated because she's feeling or Mary is on point or anxious or feeling the jitters really of all the adrenaline. And I used to think it was Mary that, before you know it, there's a switch. So the question is, did Mary go away or what happened? The reality is this, I think, is not so much that Mary went away, but Carrie pulls Mary in. Now, Mary has gone into a little time capsule, so to speak. And so we call that dissociation. So let's say the session, by the way, this will be helpful. So let's say the session is from 3 to 4. I actually recommend 2 hours, ideally. I recommend to therapists that you're going to have to, if you are going to work with SRA survivors or MK Ultra, Do not start working with them if you are dependent upon insurance and you're not going to offer any additional sessions at any sort of break or free. Do not do that. Okay. It is not sufficient. 1 hour once a week. Um, do not do that. Just do not work with, refer them on. Don't in a cold way, but out of care and concern. If somebody has all of this, you're never going to make progress 1 hour once a week. It ain't going to happen. Okay. So this kind of work is at least twice a week, 2 hours, but ideally twice a week, a block of 2 hours at the beginning, 3 times a week, 2 hours each. So you can see how many therapists, right? Insurance isn't going to pay. Well, then don't start to specialize then, right? Go into this for the right reason. And there's a balance, right? We all need to be paid, but it's just a very hard thing. So, okay, sorry. I digress, but that's important. Okay. So for the first number of months, you're going to almost like going to the chiropractor for the first time. You really have to double up on adjustments. Okay, Mary comes in. We've got Santa Ana winds blowing in Southern California. She comes in at 3 o'clock. And all she knows is we're going to do this. She comes in at 3 o'clock. You're seeing Mary. Okay. Let's say that's the name that she signs. That's her, and that's on her driver's license. Okay. Well, before you know it, somehow Mary changes. Okay. So the Mary that was there present, before you know it, I don't know, I should do a video so that there's like animation, but before you know it, Mary has sort of changed. But now let's pretend we've been working with Mary long enough and we can notice the change. So before you know it, Mary goes away and now there's Carrie. You'll see you'll hear voice inflection. There's going to be facial expression difference. Oftentimes when the switching has happened, you're going to see pupil dilation. The light hasn't changed in the office, but you're going to see this change. So now Carrie is out. Of course, she's still my client, right? But then there's a whole different persona. And now Carrie will suddenly shift the topic. It could be very quick. So Mary came in talking about she doesn't know why she's anxious. And so we're exploring why she's anxious and when did that anxiety start? Oh, we got the colored pizza there. And then before you know it, well, I started like this morning. Okay, what's going on this morning? And before you know it, all of a sudden she comes out with, so there goes Mary, right? We're exploring. All of a sudden, there's this abrupt shift, almost like mid-sentence, mid-syllable. I hate it when there's this wind, the Satan winds, or And so now we're getting somewhere. Something just connected with somebody. So Carrie now is we're getting closer to something. And so when Carrie says, and this really happened in session, by the way, in Southern California. So Carrie says, I hate the Satan winds. But she said it in such a way I didn't catch on at first because they're Santa Ana. So I thought, well, maybe she said it in such a fast way that she didn't enunciate clearly. She didn't say Santa Ana winds. She just said, I hate the Satan winds. And then all of a sudden, because it's unusual enough, it's like, say that again. And so now, a little more slowly, she repeated it. And I could start to make out, as Carrie was describing the word Santa Ana, guess what she said? Well, now I know it's not the temperature outside. It's not the wind. She's not agitated because it's messing up her hair. What is it? Well, now you're tapping into, here we go. I mean, you're not going to see all this, right? But as you're starting to get to know a system, you know that at some deep level, as Mary came into session, and as you started to begin to ask her, so we're beginning to focus more, we're zeroing in on the here and now and what triggered her. That's going to really, it's causing her to be mindful. If anybody's familiar with CBT, right? DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, right? So by asking Mary the question, she's now getting in touch with what she's really feeling. And now somebody who has parts, those feelings will be compartmentalized. So by me honoring, not telling her, well, there's nothing to worry about. Why are you all right? Because now I want to know that that truth is going to come up. And so as Carrie comes out, Mary gets pulled back in, but Mary's going to, we call it dissociating. So Mary is now dissociating. Okay. So we still have my client Mary, oops, sorry, right? Mary's body, my client. If anybody walked in session, they'd still see Mary, but I have another part of Mary out. So Carrie, who is being triggered by something going on in the here and now. And you notice, what is her root issue? So how do I know that? Because eventually, as I was getting to know Carrie, I began to realize there's a theme here. The things that trigger Carrie, that bring Carrie out, had to do with spiritual guilt. So if she comes out now, triggered by winds, then I can probably guess that somebody did a number on her in terms of theology, or somebody talking about God or Satan. Okay, so Carrie then is triggered by things related to spiritual topics, and she has guilt. So in that session, I was able to spend some time getting some information, and lo and behold, of course, where did she get that information? So now there's some disclosure. So in her case, since Carrie is a little bit deeper, then Carrie, now this is true with the other parts, but I'll show you what happens. Carrie goes back, and now Mary comes out. Now, let's say the session started at 3 p.m. When that switch took place, let's say it starts, that switch takes place at 3:10. Let's say my conversation with Carrie took place over 5 minutes, but let's even say 10 minutes. So it starts the conversation, that switch at 3:10. And then before you know it, there's been sufficient information disclosed or enough truth, because as I say, oh, you mean the Santa Ana winds? Well, what is Carrie going to look like, by the way? I know I launched into this example, but kind of go with this, right? Carrie all of a sudden is going to be stopped in her tracks a little bit, because what I've just said is brand new to her. She's looking at my facial expressions, right? Because she knows that it's the Satan winds. So for the first time, because a part of her is literally in the here and now, she can hear something that is able to compare and contrast truth. And now a part of her, meaning Carrie, part of Mary, Carrie is able to begin to think about that new information. So some truth is starting to sink in, and the truth will do what? Will set her free. So think about a cult member. Remember, the cult leader wants to isolate everybody. The last thing they want to do, or a communist country, is allow outside input. Allow somebody to listen to the voice of America, but boy, did that end up getting all screwed up, right? But the idea that we're trying to send information down into behind the iron curtain, behind the bamboo curtain. So Carrie now has been in the iron curtain or the bamboo curtain, and all of a sudden comes out and is hearing something, really hearing it for the very first time. So now Carrie's left to process, meaning as she and I talk about it, now she has a new piece of information. And as that starts to settle her down and the body down, then guess what happens? Then it's safe for Mary to come back, because now there's less anxiety, which is really, again, as we talked about, adrenaline. So Mary comes back. Now Mary, meaning that switch happened, it initially happened, Carrie comes out, pulls Mary in at 3:10, it's now 3:20. Oftentimes what will happen is, I would say oftentimes, not every single time, but Mary would have a propensity to, and this would be very consistent with Mary, when she came back out, you would notice Mary would blink a couple times, kind of like if we zoned out for a moment, like, where am I? Right? So Mary would blink a couple times, and then Mary would consistently look at my watch. Now, that was a very interesting thing. It took me a while to figure out, because her eyes always went to my left wrist at the time when I used to wear a watch. She never wore a watch, so that you wonder what that's about. That's interesting. But when I began to see pairing of this blinking, she comes back and then she looks, I began to realize, wait a second, she's looking at my watch, because as I'm working with her, my palms are face down. So the dial of my watch is where? Now, some people wear their wristwatch on the inside, right? Mine would be kind of normal up top on my forearm right there. So if I'm sitting there, if she glances at my wrist, she can see the time, how much time has moved. And so I remember once I finally figured this out, I covered my watch as the switch was reversing and she was coming back out. And I covered my watch. Her eyes glance at the watch. I know this is tangential, but this will help, right? And I covered it. So she comes back to, and she looks at the watch, and now something's different. I'm covering my watch. Because I figured out what happened, as she's looking at my wrist, I said, "What are you looking for?" So now I'm making covert overt, and she stops. She's kind of staring at me. I said, what time is it, do you think? Now she glances again. She can't see it. And I said, Mary, tell me what time you think it is. And now what's happening? I'm beginning to cause Mary to have to become a little more aware of the dissociation, that it really is happening. And so I remember as I asked Mary, what time do you think it is? And she has now the beginning of a worried look on her face, in this sense that she knows she can't excuse it or explain it away, ultimately to herself. So I said, Mary, you don't know if it's been 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 45 minutes, or if the session's almost done, do you? Okay, now, why would I reference that? Because part of these levels are designed to not only keep things functional, but also to keep anything from getting to the surface that would start a disruption. And part of what would start a disruption is enough pieces of information. I'm going to cover this again just for a second. So I'm going to talk to Mary, right? So Mary's come back, as it were. And I've let her know that you kind of do lose track of time, don't you? Can you explain that? Okay, so Mary, aside from our little color, our spinning pizza, Mary now is sort of left with herself to have to face additional fact-based information that things happen, Mary, that you can't dismiss away. But you're not crazy, Mary, right? You're not crazy. And you were disclosing some information to me. I know what that information is. Tell me what you just told me over the past 10 to 15 minutes. Now, right, just kind of in good humor, because I'd gotten to know Mary actually over the course of a number of years. I said, Mary, tell me what you told me over the past 50 minutes. She says, it hasn't been 50 minutes. I said, no, I'm just kidding. Over the past 10 minutes. She says, oh, but still now what is she left with? This dilemma, like, I don't remember 10 minutes. Okay. And then again, little by little, it's chipping away at understandable defenses. Because Mary has a sense that if this is true, then that might be true. And then how far does this go? Well, over time, she's had enough indicators that there's some stuff, maybe stuff early on and not good stuff. And who wants to believe that that happened? So that one example that I just gave, there's a good example that depending upon the situation, you can have present day person that comes into a session, or you go to work But throughout the day, you might lose chunks of time. Okay, so there's our anxious Annie, but then come back. But those may be brief times. But then there might be times, and so this is picking up, I don't know what that is. Oh, but then there might be times when what we will say is you're not just triggered, but you're really triggered. Okay. When you are really triggered, what's happening now is it is, as it were, connecting with those parts. Okay. These parts are here ultimately to ensure that if these backup parts, it's funny to say backup, but if these primary parts, current primary parts, get overwhelmed, then these parts are going to step in because it has to do with pain management. It has to do with overwhelm management, right? So I kind of use the term pain loosely. If you have a lot of anxiety, it really is painful. It's not comfortable. It's not good to, meaning nobody likes to feel that. So whenever there is anything other than feeling okay, then a part of me has to try to adjust to that. If you've gone through a lot of trauma, then your ability to adjust to that, so here we are again, it's just you, but your ability to adjust has become compartmentalized. So there won't be the smooth transition within yourself where you're able to kind of access different aspects of yourself in a smooth transition. It reaches a certain threshold, let's say a scale of 1 to 10, and maybe a 4, maybe a 3, wherever that is. And all of a sudden, before you know it, you're accessing these present everyday parts. Okay? And this is enough. Life has enough challenges. But now, if you encounter something or someone who reminds you of something at a deeper level, what's going to happen is that level is now going to be brought to bear. Because these parts will also be present during the day. So there can be a lot of shifting. But we could say these parts aren't designed or intended to deal with significant potential threats. Okay, maybe the frustrations and irritations and the stresses of normal life. But if you encounter something or someone, we might say, how about this? Buttons and triggers. So that's a good way to put it. So we're all walking through this together. Okay. So buttons and triggers. Now, these could be triggered a little bit. Maybe the more mild stuff. It's still fair to say, you know what? That person ticked me off. But would I say that person triggered me? So I think there's a difference. And you know what? That's how we'll go with this. So this is the more functional day-to-day stuff, because as Jesus said, in this life, you'll have difficulties, going through the world. These are people that take your parking space or just life. Okay. But there's one thing, it's one thing to have somebody take your parking space. It's another thing to have somebody look at you and really take your space and then flip you off and then get out of the vehicle and start, right? It's like, what? And it took it to the next level. So a cashier that was rude. Okay. So Dana can handle that. But a cashier that not only is rude, but says, you know what? Meet me on the parking lot. I'll show. I'm making that up. All of a sudden, now it's a different level. They took it to a different level. And so now, Dana can handle rudeness, but potential aggression. Whoa. What domain is that? Right? When somebody is, so here we're going to put everybody back where they belong, so to speak. Okay. So Mary goes to Walmart. I'm just going to make something and encounters a rude cashier. Okay. So Dana uh, deals with that, pulls her in for a second. And Mary's going, no, no, no. Or there's certainly parts of Mary, like, hold on, the anxious one, people pleasing. I need to add another one, huh? Okay, so, but we'll say, okay, we could say this is people pleasing, helpful, right? Maybe, oh, that's not helpful. So all of a sudden, we have a rude cashier. Um, So the longer in line or the longer Mary's items are being scanned, beep, beep. I'm picturing her hands, the cashier's hands scanning these things. Well, there all of a sudden may be because the cashier is being rude. Hold on, let me get back to where we are. Okay, uh, so Mary is at Walmart, pulls in with her grocery cart to the aisle, and she doesn't do self checkout. She's doing the having a cashier help her. And before you know it, she's sensing that this cashier is just kind of rude. She's getting vibes, and maybe Mary starts asking, like, how's your day? Fine. Or doesn't even respond. Okay. So now, because Mary has just started to feel certain things, it's triggered on the inside. So very quickly, Mary, and this is where we talked about Emma headaches. So all of a sudden, if we got a lot of movement going on, maybe Dana comes in the occipital area. Well, maybe the anxious part is the left temporal area. Maybe the dutiful one is on the right or in the frontal area. So depending upon who's starting to, it's really who's going to win out, quite frankly. So quickly, so Mary's being a little triggered by the situation. So now we've got a bunch of different thoughts. Now, do we have the detached one? There we go. You know, Marcia just doesn't care. So Marcia's still smoking dope or taking CBT pill. Okay, moving along. But we might start to have crosstalk as we talked about. I think I need to get my little arrow. Let's get our little arrow here. Draw. Nope, that's what we're going to insert, and we're going to insert an arrow here. Just bear with me, everybody. So we're going to shape. That's what we're doing. Okay, there we go. So we got some shape going on. So. Well, I'm going to have to increase that. So bear with me. You know what? We'll do red just for the heck of it, and then we're going to increase it just so we can see all this. Here we go. Okay, there we go. So I'm not necessarily doing this red because Dana is the one that can be aggressive just for the sake of allowing us to see. So Dana is starting to poke, like, don't let her talk to you like that. What are you talking about? Or come on, she's being rude. Say something, don't be a doormat. Don't be, right? Starting to say something. And then maybe Robin's, no, do we have a spiritual one? But let's say we got a placating one. Think, oh no, she's probably having a hard time. And maybe we just need to crack a joke. Maybe we just need to keep it light. All of a sudden, Dana, who has been getting down on Mary, all of a sudden says, and you be quiet. What are you talking about? Well, now we can have, okay, hold on. We're gonna copy and paste this. Ready? Copy. Let's see if this will come out and paste. Hopefully it's there. There we go. Okay. So now we can have, and this oftentimes happens. I can't see there we go. So everybody will be able to relate to this with parts, right? So before they come out, oftentimes what's going to start happening, you're going to have crosstalk, right? We'll move her down here. So now we have this dialogue going on. Maybe we should paint her a different color just to differentiate. There we go. Okay. So let's say, So let's say Brenda, in response to Mary sees the cashier, Mary is conflicted because we see the cashier who's starting to be a little rude. And Dana's saying, well, that's what she's paid for. That's her job, So first of all, she's talking to Mary. So at first, Mary's on the receiving end of this cashier that's not being very cordial. And Mary's starting to feel anxious. Mary hasn't done anything wrong. She's starting to feel anxious. And Dana says, hey, the assertiveness training courses we've been taking, get her, so we got the poke. And all of a sudden, Brenda, the helpful one, starts to say, Mary, you know what? Ask her if you can help her with her job. Does she need a break? As a matter of fact, why don't you take over for her, even though you're not going to get paid, right? Maybe she's having a hard day. So why don't you just ask her? And so what is Dana doing? Dana's saying, don't let her talk to you like that. What are you? So now we have in one ear or the other, everything's being directed to Mary, but then all of a sudden, Dana might do what? You know what, Brenda? Shut up. What are you talking about? We're not putts. And then Brenda might say, you know what? You know we're not supposed to be like that. Okay. But oftentimes Mary is going to feel like that conversation, oftentimes, by the way, that's taking place above her. And I think we mentioned that before last time, that Mary will hear these conversations either in one ear on the other or just above her. So we've got all this back and forth conversation going on, right? But Mary has never wanted to say anything because Mary was told only crazy people hear voices. Okay. So it's not crazy. But, you know, if you say it to the wrong professional, the wrong mental health professional or psychiatrist, they're going to say, now you hear voices, right? Because that mental health professional or psychiatrist, if they're of the belief that hearing voices means you're crazy, then they're going to conclude, well, that's crazy. You don't hear it. You're delusional. You're manufactured, whatever. Okay. It does not mean you're crazy. Now, there's a difference, and I mentioned this before. There's a difference between, there's 5 different reasons for voices, but with this kind of voice, the crazy voice versus non-crazy voice, this is non-crazy voice. It can be crazy making, right? But this is not crazy. Why? Because these are parts of you. Now, what's the difference? If all of you were in my class, I would say, okay, so what's the difference between the crazy and the non-crazy voices? And if anybody remembered, we would do this. I'm just going to use the arrows. Okay. We'll do it like this. Okay. If Mary is hearing voices coming where? Doink, doink, right? Coming from outside in. So this is Mary's hair. Okay. Outside of her. So if voices are coming like from the Norwegian antenna being broadcast to her, if she's watching TV and CNN is giving her special messages, okay, those are the crazy voices. That's why if Mary were truly crazy, Mary would try to shield her scalp, her cranium, by a tinfoil hat so that these would bounce off. They couldn't get through. Like the mothership is sending messages. Those are the crazy ones. Okay. How also can you tell? So one thing you ask is, are you hearing voices from the outside in or from the inside in? If it's inside in, that's not crazy. Okay. Now it may seem different, but right, you've probably lived with that forever. Okay. But that's not psychosis. From the outside in is psychosis. Now, demonic possession, other things, we'll tackle that at some point in time. Okay. But all things being equal, here's another thing where you can tell the difference between crazy voices and dissociative voices or voices coming from parts. Okay. People that hear voices from the outside in know that they're picking up messages. Do they feel crazy? No, they feel convinced because this information is for them, so they feel. Matter of fact, I'm gonna draw something here. I'm just gonna everybody stay with me just for a second. We're gonna do this right here. Okay, so it's like this is our protective, field around us. Okay, so if Mary is schizophrenic, truly psychotic. Okay, let me see if I can. Oh, I don't think I can. Right, I can't change the color just now. Okay, so if Mary is hearing voices from the outside in, then doesn't it make sense that she's going to do a protective mechanism to cause these to bounce off? Okay, hence we get the term tinfoil hat. Now, if Mary truly is crazy, will Mary have a problem telling a mental health professional or a doctor that this is going on. And this is a review, by the way, but maybe this is helpful. Okay. She won't have a problem, or he won't, this could be anybody. Okay. So if it's from the outside in, the person that's truly going schizophrenic will want to protect their brain from the outside waves or something, the messages, the EMP or something. So they're going to have a protective mechanism, some sort, and they're going to either want help, or they're at least going to want people to know about these messages and the entities or the mothership that are sending these, because in a way, they feel they've been chosen. So there's what we call that paranoid schizophrenia, because eventually also oftentimes these messages are not just persecutorial, but you had better do this or the world's going to end. You better do this or a loved one's going to die. You better follow our orders okay. So if you're kind of halfway normal, that may sound funny, right? You're going to either want it to stop, or you're going to want to help protect somebody else. So you'll offer to make another tinfoil hat for them. Okay. So one thing you look for to differentiate between crazy voices versus, it's somebody that truly is psychotic versus somebody that isn't, is, are they willing and able and free to talk about this dynamic? A crazy person, truly crazy person, will bring it up, or they're going to talk about it, because this person that's experiencing this doesn't believe they're crazy. Okay, so the voices from the outside in and the wanting to protect their head, right? They have a force field, a shield. Those are two indicators, and wanting to talk about it. Okay, those are two indicators that we're dealing with bona fide schizophrenia. Now, I also just heard a doctor, and he made a pretty good case that there is no real genetic predisposition, which was new news. So anyway, there can be a lot of information about that, but that's in a nutshell. Okay, that's how you differentiate the crazy voices from, now I'm going to get rid of the crazy voices, from the voices that are non-crazy, because these voices come from the inside in. Okay, it's different from the outside in. And in this case, Mary, we're going to put her up at the outside there. Mary is fearful that she's what? That she's crazy. Now, remember the other situation with the voices from the outside in. Does that, in that condition, would Mary feel she's crazy? No, remember, she's going to talk to the doctor about it and urge the doctor, right, to take protective steps for him and his own family. And doctor, I brought an extra tinfoil hat for you because I care about you and I want you to feel safe. Or don't watch this channel, or, okay. So again, Mary, if she's crazy, she will not fear that she's crazy. Okay, so if you're listening to this and you're watching this little rough diagram or this demonstration here, if you fear that you're crazy, you're not. If you hear voices on the inside in, you're not crazy. You have this dynamic going on. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful to somebody. So we're going to come back to Mary now, as we'll advance our discussion for a little bit, and then we'll keep continuing in our series. So Mary comes into session. Mary has, a lot of the indicators that there's been sexual abuse. That would be the depression. That would be anxiety, panic attacks, eating disorders, compulsive behaviors. She's probably been also diagnosed as having personality disorders. We'd have borderline personality disorder. We'd have histrionic. We'd have dissociative. Sometimes, although again, a lot of doctors or clinicians don't believe in that. How about there'd be adjustment disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, almost inevitably borderline personality disorder. And by the way, where does that come from? And Frank Anderson put it beautifully that he's never seen a case of BPD, borderline personality disorder, that really isn't attributable to parts. So the best way, and it's pretty much true, the best way to view, although there is a brain structure we're going to look at in the next few weeks, some brain scans of borderline personality disorder versus parts. So you can actually have a very biophysiological brain structural issue with borderline personality disorder. Okay. But something that can look like borderline personality is parts, where you then can have a part that's very playful. So you can have quick shifting going on from playful to what? To aggressive. And so these two are switching and they're angry with each other. And then Mary may or may not remember, but the friends of Mary or people in Mary's life or her spouse or her kids, all they know is mom keeps changing up, right? Before you know it, mom's this. And then I could even put this in front. Let me bring the front here. There we go. So mom just changes up. As a matter of fact, oh, that's good, right? Let me make Dana a little larger. So before they know it, mom just keeps changing up real fast. And as fast as mom changes up, mom comes back. And so they never know which mom they're dealing with. Okay. So oftentimes, especially if there's sexual abuse or there's a lot of abuse, how do you know if that? One of the key indicators, lapse of time. So is there dissociation? Okay. Or triggers. Okay. And then, of course, the switching up. So if that's going on, then again, that would be part of the intake, right? As you're meeting Mary. Oh, we'll just leave Dana like that for a moment now. So we're meeting with Mary. Mary starts to check all the indicators she's gone through, maybe the dissociative experiences scale. You've talked to her, you've kind of run through the various questions. Does she lose track of time? Does she have the different, more than one diagnoses in the past? And then start to ask, does she lose track of time? Does she find that she has items that she doesn't know, especially clothing for women, not just with women, but a lot of times women? Right? Does she run late a lot because she's changing her clothes? But gaps of time. Does she, again, we all lose items. We can't remember every single detail, but losing hours, days, and weeks, including years. So that's why also as an assignment, a homework assignment, a very helpful one is doing a timeline, beginning to walk yourself through the history of your life, the significant events. If you find that there are significant gaps of time, the question is, what's up with that? Meaning that provides you with additional information and looking at photographs. If, as you look at photographs, it's like you don't remember, then that can be an indication. The more of that, then you know something's going on. And then the therapist ideally will begin to ask for, hey, do you ever hear some, and how you put it, some static on the inside? Do you hear some stuff on the inside? You know, you kind of gingerly ask the questions, at least I do, and they say, well, what do you mean? Because now they have a sense that maybe you're getting at something. Well, do you ever kind of, well, there's self-talk, and then there's something a little more than self-talk, right? Because I, as a clinician, want to help that conversation go well, because the client doesn't know what I'm going to do with that. So if they can see that I'm suddenly being tentative, then it's going to be easier for them to acknowledge or admit if in fact it happens. Okay. So if it happens, then what you're going to be doing, now I'm going to see if I can move Dana backward just a little bit. Send it backward. Oh, she won't disappear. There we go. There we go. I don't want Dana to disappear. That would be like integration. I don't believe in integration now. Okay. So that'll be for another topic. So again, I'm working with Mary. We've begun to help her feel more comfortable. We've established a relationship, because ultimately what we're doing for these podcasts, and what we're doing is we're helping someone. What can you expect? What should you expect? How will therapy go for the therapist? Where are you going? You want to establish that relationship with Mary and begin to discern and help her discern. Are there times where it seems like there's other aspects of you? Okay. So then what'll happen is, and where we ended last time, is we talked about establishing ultimately a one-up, one-down relationship with each of the parts. And so I believe what we did is we ended up, these are always very fine at first. So if you've never seen how to do charts with Word document, this is how you do it. Right, so we're going to copy and paste this. So copy, and now we're just going to, we're going to paste a lot of this. So here we go. So little by little, as the therapist, you're going to help decrease Mary's anxiety by helping her know that the experiences she experiences, that's redundant, huh? I'm losing track of my, there we go. That the experiences she experiences, as far as the dissociation, doesn't make her crazy. It just means something probably is going on that she's not aware of. And on some level, though, she has a sense. Okay, so what we're going to do is little by little, so you kind of get the feel of where we're going with this, hopefully, which is this. Right now, Mary is, I think the lines will be there. Okay. Mary is sort of aware of, or maybe fairly aware of, but never has really either wanted to focus on it or hoped it wasn't the case. Again, remember the voices that she has heard, either directly to her or cross-talking, also associated sometimes with the pain in the scalp and the cranium. So what she has sensed is there's some stuff going on, but she hasn't really wanted to believe for fear of she's crazy, that that stuff is associated with parts. So the first stage of therapy, the very first part, of course, is the therapist and Mary establishing the relationship before we're even going to talk about the issue of parts. Okay. But during that early exploratory time, we're going to begin to find out, are there parts that could then explain the gaps of time, the changeability, the degree of anxiety, depression, the buttons and triggers, the panic attacks, the intrusive dreams, the body memories. We talked, Emma, a little earlier. Can the body start to feel certain things? So by the time most people are listening, Emma, to your podcast and our discussion, let's say Mary has started to, so she stumbled across the Imagination podcast, and all of a sudden she's listening right now. So that something has drawn her to that. We're going to say that God has arranged that. Okay, but Mary has been living with these different dynamics, the voices, but hasn't wanted to say anything. Okay, it's probably time now to begin to risk believing that there are parts. Okay, and this is ultimately where, as talked about before, journaling ultimately becomes invaluable. So two things need to take place during the early stage is you need to risk believing that this is real. Okay, it doesn't make you crazy. This is real. And each of these parts, the times you lose track of time or the gaps, it's safe to say, unless it was really super triggering. So we'll just talk about during the day. Let's say this. How many outfits did you change into today? Okay. It's not uncommon that maybe there were 4 outfits you changed into. Now, some people say, no, I didn't. I've gotten to a point where I lay them out ahead of time. Okay. But why do you do that? Well, because I was changing 4 outfits during the day. I was running late to work. Okay. So you at least got a system that helps, but why did you do that? Because you found that there was some crazy making going on. Okay. But have you ever found that you're getting ready to leave for work or on a date or go somewhere, and before you know it, you changed your outfit or something? There's something that changes. Or do you ever find yourself driving somewhere and before you know it, you can't figure out where you are? That could have to do with these parts. But usually, quite frankly, that's going to have to do with these parts. Okay. Because that's a little more profound kind of, it's tapping into a little deeper kind of pain. Okay. Or dynamics. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is come to a point in time for Mary. The first thing she's going to do is come to recognize that this aspect of herself, this level, is not crazy, and that she needs to be willing to start communicating. And how you do that? Okay, 2 things. Even right now, if you're listening to this, if you've got parts, trust me, they're listening too, and they're probably, in a way, they're probably doing one of 2 things. They're either rooting you on or rooting me on, saying, yeah, tell her, right? Tell Mary, we've been trying to talk to her. Or they might be a little concerned and therefore suddenly they went quiet. So if it is unusually quiet, or if you're starting to hear like a lot of inner confirmation, then you know what? Take note of that. Now, if it's unusually quiet, the question is this: why, just because you're watching this video, is it unusually quiet? Where did all that previous internal activity go? Why is it suddenly quiet? When did it get quiet? My hunch is it got quiet as the chart started to come up. Why would that cause everything to go quiet? It could be either they are also starting to find out, because remember what also happens. And this is kind of an interesting thing. I think it's safe to say that when Dana comes out, Dana knows that she's helping Mary, but also it might be safe to say that sometimes Dana forgets that this really is what's going on. Now, that may sound funny. It's not to say that Dana forgets that Dana's a part, but it also could mean that maybe Dana knows there are times that she's gotten overwhelmed. And when Dana started to, this is very true, okay, that Dana pulls, oh, hold on here. Dana pulled, oh gosh, okay, we got to get our little circles. Okay, so Dana pulled Mary in, but before Dana knows it, it's almost like the argument started, the frustration was increasing, and before you know it, Dana can't remember how it ended. So sometimes, if Dana starts to really realize that she is here for Mary, now that might sound funny because on one level, Dana knows very much, but also because it's been so automatic, it's more comfortable for Dana just to do what Dana does. But if Dana begins to realize that there can be times that Dana dissociates, then that starts to mean that what? Right? That there's more to this whole thing, that all of them more than meets the eye, which ultimately also means that they've been impacted. Okay, different ballgame then, right? Because now it's going to mean that there really is deeper levels of pain that can't just be managed in the here and now, that we have to start doing some therapy. Okay, so these two levels, the co-conscious level and the conscious awareness level, these parts would be okay never doing therapy. Matter of fact, these parts might be okay doing just behavioral therapy. And it would work, right? If there wasn't anything else under the surface. But the fact that there are parts presupposes what? Presupposes that things became overwhelming early on. But that level doesn't have much conscious awareness. They're co-conscious with Mary, but they don't know. So each level knows what's happening on the next level up, but they don't really know what happens in the level beneath. So the proposition then, as you're beginning to get to know Mary, and these parts are starting to show up in session, and now you're starting to have, in a way, you're establishing rapport with each of these parts. And this could be a number of months, if not, well, certainly you're then always going to see them. So in the first couple of months, it really then is you beginning to get to know them. And as you get to know them, remember early on, we talked about how the therapeutic relationship, we're just going to move this down here for a second. The therapeutic relationship will do what? It will have a tendency to pull up those deeper wounds, right? Those parts that are wounded, those parts. So there can be an increasing degree of angst by the parts that have been helping in the everyday, because they're starting to get a sense of what? That there's more to them, more to the system that meets the eye, which also then means two things. That there's greater degrees of emotions than they're aware of. And what do they do? Because all they know is sometimes they get triggered, and before you know it, who comes out? Right. And so, like, Dana there can handle the more mild stuff, but she doesn't know that when it gets to level 5, let's say from a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being nuclear rage, when it gets to a 4 or a 5, Dana doesn't know that she all of a sudden gets pulled in. Well, then the question is, and Dana internally has a sense of this. Wait a second, and then Mary also is feeling it. That wait a second, when it gets a certain level, yeah, I come out, but then to find out probably two things. One, she'll probably feel Dana will feel, well, I'm not I can't handle it. But then the question is, what happens? Why can't I remember? What can't? So you can see then all of them are very connected up top because they get very disconcerted when they realize they can't remember. Because now, how are you supposed to protect Mary if you can't remember? Dana's supposed to be there to protect Mary, but when it gets, level 4, level 5, and all of a sudden, even Dana gets pulled in. So first of all, Dana pulls Mary in. This is all subconscious in a way, or unconscious, right? But then it gets to, so the Walmart cashier is starting to get moving from obnoxious to irritating to upsetting to all of a sudden aggressive. The moment that happens, that aggression was more than she's comfortable with. All of a sudden, Dana gets pulled in, and Dana probably then gets pulled into back to her level. As a matter of fact, I know she does, because now Jimmy comes out and handles it. Well, then after the cashier has been put in her place, and Jimmy says, "Meet me outside," or starts to reach over, grab the cashier by the throat or something. Then all of a sudden, when the threat is taken care of very forthrightly, now the threat is gone. And then what happens? So it's back to what level? It's back to 0. Now let me, as a matter of fact, it's probably confusing you all. Okay. And I know, gosh, what I have to do is, just so everybody can see this, I'm going to enlarge it. My apologies here, because I know sometimes, there we go. So thank you all for hanging in there, right? Because now you can read the different, okay, I'll shrink this just a little bit, but sometimes it helps if you can actually see what I've written there. Okay, so there we go. So remember, Jimmy came out, so it's like the third level of defense, or second level. We'll just call it third level, because at first, Mary's trying to handle it, so that's first level. So the tension is going from level 1 to 2. So let's say 10 is the top level tension. So it goes from 1 to 2. And now Mary starts to feel the anxiety, which is adrenaline because of the knapsacks, remember? So all of a sudden, Dana steps in, pulls Mary in when it reaches 2. So now Dana's tackling it, now going back and forth. It's now reaching 2, 3, 4, and now it's reached 5. But we don't know, because this other cashier, or the cashier, is starting to match and is starting to escalate. And so what happens? When it reaches a certain threshold, then the next line of defense comes in, and it happens in a split second. And so certainly then this would be what Mary has described in the past, an anger blackout. So Jimmy's there, punches does something pretty radical to solve the issue very forthrightly. By now, the management has come out. We've got different things, right? All hell can break loose. But then all of a sudden, because it went really radical in a way, what happens? The issue suddenly calms down. And so I'm sorry. So Dana got pulled in to her level. And once it goes from 5, 6, 7 back to 0, because it's calm, well, who can come back out now? But it also may be that initially, what comes out, or what part comes out? Maybe an anxious part. Let's also find, we could have a guilty part. I'm just looking, you know what? I'm probably going to have to create some other parts. Huh? Sorry, that's kind of funny. but maybe the guilty part came out. Oh, that wasn't very Christian. I can't believe. So we could actually have two. Now, these two are battling under the surface, right? We showed that before. Only one's out, but right. Oh, I can't believe it. It's going to be horrible. And the cops are going to be called. And oh, how am I ever going to face the pastor? Look what I did. A good Christian doesn't, right? So we can have all this switching because it really triggered some core, deeper, intense, because it feels familiar in a more threatening way. That's when it shifted, by the way. That's when it shifted. When it starts to get agitated, it's at this level. But when it starts to become more overwhelming, so this level is there to kind of help manage, of course they are, right? The level 2s and 3s and 4, but when it suddenly goes to a deeper level, now we've tapped into, where did we just do? Okay, there we go. We just tapped into now a deeper level, what we would call subconscious part, to try to handle things. Okay, so eventually, let's say the manager is called or whatever, and things are calmed down, and Mary comes back. Now Mary has challenge, because does Mary remember what happened and what words were exchanged? And she doesn't remember any of that, but she has to fake it because she's either going to sound crazy. So you've got a lot of, now what was, by the way, what was the body, right? What was triggered? You've got the adrenal glands. You have a surge of adrenaline. We call that, right, a panic attack, or what's going to happen with the heartbeat. So Mary is feeling all sorts of what, right? She's feeling all of Jimmy's aggression. It started with Dana's, and now, the defensiveness, and now we had aggressiveness, but Mary doesn't have the memories. And so all she knows is she's got tachycardia, she's got blood pressure issues, and she feels crazy, and she might even just leave her groceries behind. Now, again, it doesn't have to mean they got into it with with the cashier. But again, something could have triggered something earlier. I'm using now a different analogy. Let's say everything was fine and a panic attack happened. Panic attacks are from this level. Okay. And in a way, oftentimes, okay, let me add something and then we may, and this will kind of review a little bit, but if you're having a panic attack, it also very much could be that childlike part is trying to get through. And a lot of these are now going into damage control mode because Tina is starting to come through, or a memory is triggering and almost pulling Tina up. And so everybody's going in damage control mode to try to keep things together. So that's where sometimes a panic attack would come from. And think about those of you that experience panic attacks. What happens oftentimes after a panic attack? Does that ring a bell? Self-harm. Or really, in a way, compulsivity. Here, all of a sudden, they just have to go have a lot of sex, or just something. They have to go drink. They have to go self-anesthetize. But self-harm oftentimes is very effective, right? And those of you that do have self-harm, somebody that doesn't understand it will not understand. It's like, what? How can cutting soothe or take away? Because greater pain wins out. This was a little bit of review, but hopefully adding additional dynamics. Because now, next time, because I'm aware of the time, and I figure what we'll do is we'll kind of bring it to, this was very much what I would say is review, but hopefully then it's understandable how you can have this switching and then a deeper level of switching. This is where the more intense feelings are under this layer. So for instance, in therapy, it's going to be a process of first getting to know your kind of co-conscious or everyday parts. But then little by little, and this is where journaling is so important, because behind each of these are going to be corresponding ones that need to have a say. Because ultimately, you're going to have to, as a therapist, These are the ones that are going to be the next level that you're going to have to get to know. And every now and then, just like we showed, you're going to see Jimmy. But then Jimmy's going to do what? Jimmy's going to drop down. You may find that you're talking and you get to know Dana for a while, but then all of a sudden, as a therapist, you're going to see a different degree of intensity that goes away just as quickly as it appeared. So you're then connecting with, in the same category of intensity, or the same category of feel of like protectiveness, but there's a whole different qualitative feel. So first it's going to be us getting to know, and the client, and getting to know their everyday parts, getting a sense of them, beginning that free flow of information. That's where journaling comes in. So you're going to get to know that first level. But then the reason you're in therapy is ultimately there's been hurt. The flip side of hurt is anger. So there's been wounds. That's where these contain a fair degree of pain management. So they're aware of deeper level stuff, but they haven't wanted to come out with it. Okay, so that's why at first you're only going to see these parts briefly. Just as the very first, you only saw these parts briefly. Now, once these parts get to trust you, you're going to see them as the primary. And current primary parts. So in session, Mary comes in, and before you know it, pretty much the session is going to be working with all the primary co-conscious parts. So in one session, let's say in an hour session, I could have spoken to each of these, and there'll be variations, right? Of Dana, there's going to be a couple maybe that deal with the defensiveness, or the Robins and the Stephanies. It may be in one session, I've talked to all of them multiple times. I started with Mary, and it may be that I end with Mary. Now, the question is, has Mary been in the session? Of course she has. So the co-conscious parts have been helping Mary work through issues. Because let's say Mary's slacking, she'd call it, she's not, Mary never slacks, but let's say, and that's what Dana would say, she's slacking at work. Okay, so Mary is falling behind because quite frankly, Mary is taking on too many knapsacks, or has too many knapsacks ultimately from way down here, right? She really, from the people that hurt her and abused her. Oh, sorry. Okay, so we're going to begin on this level. We're going to also talk about boundaries. We're going to talk about some functional stuff, make sure that Mary can function at work. So we're going to talk about communication skills. We're going to talk about problem-solving skills. And we're also going to begin to help challenge these parts to figure out why they get triggered and where do they go when they get triggered. Because that's then starting to help them realize, okay, there's more to this. And so it may be, well, the fact is, they are not really looking forward to learning about those parts, but it's a journey. But the more you get to know all these parts as a therapist, or the more, if you're the client, the more you get to know them, then what'll happen, the same idea with Tina, how they're pulled up because truth is pulling them up and they're starting to sense a little bit of hope. You're going to find that they will show themselves more. So you're really underway into the active stage of therapy. Not that nobody's active, but it's kind of like the beginning stages and then the active stage, meaning you're really starting to get into deeper stuff, because remember, all these have more intense emotions which come out when they're triggered, when they feel overwhelmed, when they don't feel safe, when they can sense Mary and Dana are overwhelmed. That's when Jimmy has to. And now, as you begin to interact with, and this is really when therapy goes from first gear to second gear, it doesn't mean that when I call Dana first gear therapy, it doesn't mean that Dana isn't important. It just means it's starting to really gain traction. It's just, I hope that comes across properly, right? And so once you're able to start to gain the trust of these parts, and what'll mean is they're going to have to risk too, because how about the flirtatious one? Well, you have a lot of these that have also been keeping Sally at bay, right? And so part of it, and we'll go into a little more recently, because, or a little, I'm sorry, in the next um, episode as we pick up, that you can have some of these that are not only trying to keep things, these parts at bay, but you're also trying to make sure, these parts are also trying to make sure that certain of these parts don't create a ripple effect and don't do anything in the everyday life that's going to screw things up. Like go out to a bar and meet a guy and take him to the back seat of your vehicle, right? Because, oh my gosh, look at, what could happen. Okay. And then if you have parts, so all of a sudden that's what happens. And now we've met a guy in the back seat of a vehicle. But also if there are, what? If there are, so now they're having sex with somebody they just met. And what happens if being touched brings up on a deep level some of this stuff? Well, now it reverberates all the way up. And so one act by Sally can do what? Now we've got, it's like an earthquake, right? We've got these temblors, it starts and now it really shakes. And then you have aftershocks. Well, then it triggers. So there we go. We have self-harm, we have self-deprecating, we have, and so now self-harm, including probably the internal COO. They're gonna go after Sally. Different parts are going to really get down on her. So Sally then, on some level, well, Sally feels increasingly isolated, which means she says, "Well, screw you. Then every man for themselves. And I'm going to have fun every now and then." Right? So that's where you get the chaos on the inside. So it's important for both the therapist to work methodically, to also know that these dynamics, these issues, every now and then are going to come up, meaning a part is going to come to the surface that's going to shake up the system, that's then going to have internal war going on. I don't know. People are getting get down on each other, or parts. I'm sorry, parts are going to, right? Parts are going to get down. And so every now and then things can come to a screeching halt because now you've got self-punishment going on. But for the client, what you need to know is, so let me help make sense of this. Now I'm going to cover this up so not as to overwhelm you. Just need to know that it's going to be a process, little by little, of you getting to know this level. And then just know as you get used to them, don't be surprised. So maybe this is the best way. And actually, it's going to happen. So you don't need to get discouraged, or you don't need to freak out, or don't need to get anxious. Just know this. As things are starting to move along in therapy, and you got more and more increasing free flow of information as far as kind of what's been triggering you, every now and then, because you're going to then be able to tolerate things longer because you're gaining skills, then before you know it, because you probably have people in your life that are selfish, right? Because that helpful part, the dutiful part, you haven't had boundaries up to this point. So now you're going to start to have boundaries, and that will start to create friction. It's going to start to shake up some relationships. And when that happens, it's going to reverberate now at a deeper level. Okay. And when that happens, now you're going to start to have the dissociation that happens from those deeper levels, which means there's going to be things that start to happen. Okay. So when Sally comes out, guess where you're going to go? Now, we need to work with that. Okay. Um, but all of a sudden, where Mary's always been very dutiful and responsible, all of a sudden, what's she starting to do? Starting to become very spontaneous and irresponsible. So that's where a big, okay, as a matter of fact, think about then the internal. So just as we had different parts that were communicating internally, now we've got what kind of war going on at a deeper level, much more profound. So the compulsive, overly responsible one is going after the spontaneous, irresponsible one. And it's at a level that these guys don't know what to do with, because now their cognitive behavioral stuff, the things they've practiced, it's not working. And it can feel like the system is breaking down. It's not. You're going to a deeper level. And so ultimately what you want is eventually just knowing this is the goal. You're going to get to know deeper parts of you. And you're going to begin to, and I, how Frank Anderson puts it, they are there to protect, and they're doing the best they can, ultimately, to protect Mary. Okay, that was a little bit more review and a little bit of a view of how, again, you can have the dissociation upon dissociation in a way. So how about that, Emma? We'll leave it at this point, and then we'll pick up, starting with what's it like when a little bit more of this. So we're certainly going to talk more about the suppressed parts, but then we're going to start to inch into at the middle stage of therapy, which will be these parts, which can also be, of course, that's when it gets really intense. Okay, so that's where we're going.
Terrific. That was awesome. Great presentation, as always. I love the graphics that you come up with and that you kind of edited on the spot if you need to make an example.
Yeah, everybody's seeing it live.
Well, it's good. You're creating actual, real life examples that somebody could picture, and then you're showing a scenario with the different parts on how that all works together. So that's super helpful, Jon. And like I said, there's been a lot of people that have commented how helpful this has been for them, whether they have a partner that has DID or just learning and having trouble visualizing it. If you haven't experienced this, myself included, this can be really hard to comprehend that something like this could exist in somebody. And actually getting to see it adds a different dynamic, adding a visual to anything. I love when survivors bring art on the show or some type of even photos, that show things. It's really helpful for us to kind of connect our eyes to our brain. So I really appreciate what you're doing, and you're really paving the way for people to understand this more from a very clinical perspective. And I'm really excited to dig more into this chart with you, and to go deeper into this and to help people get an understanding of both therapy and how to be a help on the other side if maybe you're a therapist or some type of a helper or supporter of a survivor. So thank you so much, Jon, for all the work that you've put into this and for providing this information for us.
Well, it's a pleasure to work with you. And I guess that's what we're doing, right? We're helping hopefully provide a service. We're helping to provide hope and encouragement and normalize.
Yes.
It can be a very tricky thing, especially if someone, ultimately at the end of the day, this degree of complexity on the inside, I don't use that to discourage. It's just when you look at that chart, for those that have really been on the receiving end of very sadistic, intentional, so the SRA, the MK Ultra, it's to give them hope that if I, as an outsider, shall we say, as a therapist, like a coach, right? I'm on the sideline looking in. If I've been able to kind of figure this out, I would say I've got a pretty good grasp of it to be able to draw this out, and by the people to be able to tell, right? Stick with us. We'll find out if Jon knows what he's talking about. The good news is this: it's a roadmap then, right? It's like we're going on safari through deep dark Africa or the Amazon, and the question is, does your tour guide Does the trailblazer, whatever analogy, does the coach know what he's doing? And so the reason I bring that up is I want to give people hope that if you have felt programmed, if you have felt that there's electrical impulses, and again, is there the possibility? There's always a possibility of anything, but like the pain that people feel in their head, oftentimes that could be parts. So the good news is, even the most complex of all SRA, okay, one of the gals, let's say Mary, so I worked with, just use her name, I worked with Mary for 8 years, 250 parts. How do I know? Because I met them. How do I know? Because I've got samples of handwriting. But 250, yeah. No, you can't have it. It's hard to believe, isn't it? And this is coming from a therapist that didn't believe in this in the first place. But when you see it, you can't deny it, right? Or you have to deny everything you've ever worked with any client. When you see somebody in distress, when you see anxiety, but especially when you see different personality states, different voice inflections, different handwriting, when you see things change right in session, when you see drawings come up, and then you see the person say, I didn't draw that, and they're freaked out by what they've drawn. When they're not in it for attention seeking, when they don't want to be in your office, when they start denying everything. Okay. The good news, in my estimation, is this. There's an end point, meaning the healing is possible. What do I mean by that? Ultimately, the entire system working together as a team. I personally don't believe in integration. I used to think that was the goal. I don't think it's possible. And don't get discouraged by that. Don't get freaked out if because I just recently, as a matter of fact, this past week, heard someone I truly believe, a survivor who has DID. She talked about one of her parts integrated and went away, and she's grieving the loss of it. Okay. So I wouldn't tell her. It's a tricky thing. I wouldn't tell her didn't happen. But from my perspective I think what happened is that part tucked herself away, got a message that it would be better if she wasn't here. Well, so where did that part go? Didn't integrate. Now, again, this may discourage, I don't want to discourage anybody, but okay, in my estimation, what happened? She's just now tucked away, but she's still listening. I think she sensed from the primary person, let's say in the interview, I think that part of her sensed that, maybe heard the pain that part was bringing about because the choices and decisions, and maybe it'd be better if I wasn't here. Well, that's very altruistic, honestly. And so she went away. So she integrated. She didn't. What did she do? That part got a message that it wasn't okay for her to be here. So she sealed herself off. That's my perspective. So the problem, in my estimation, or what that survivor might anticipate, is there will be points where she will still be triggered in the future, have buttons and triggers, or right, if a part of her is walled off, then when stress gets to a point, what's going to happen? Going to have to dissociate. So in my estimation, I don't want any part to go away. If they're there, they're there. I just want everybody to start working together and know every part of you is valuable, just as valuable as any other part. I feel like saying, okay, we've got a football team and you can only have 11 on the field, so everybody else on the bench, we have to fire you all or go away. I don't ever want to see you again. No, it's not. Everybody's really important. It's a big team. Do you know how many football players come out of the tunnel? Right? Because how many players can be played during the game? A lot. So we don't want anybody going away, because you can't go away. It's just risk believing that it's normal. That's a strange way of putting it, but it is. So everybody's important. Everybody has something to say. Everybody has legitimate feelings. So as that acceptance part takes place, then everything will start to settle down. And then I'll tell you what happens. I'd rather have a football team with a lineup, I don't know the term, a roster, yeah, of 75 players than ones with, no, we only have 11 on the field. Or in American football, right? The NFL. I only need 11. No more than that. Okay. Give me a team with 75, I'll tell you what, we're going places. But if it's just 11, that's going to get tiring. So I honor every one of my players, so to speak, and find out, oh, okay, what position do you play? And when did you come on the team? And that way we can play to everybody's strengths. There you go.
That's a terrific analogy. I love that. Thank you so much, Jon. And remind people where they can find you online, because I want everybody to go support you. And you have a bunch of places that you reside.
That's true. I've got three primary websites. The primary one is survivorsupport.net. That is a good resource for people to do adjunct therapy. That's the purpose of this site. Start from the left, move to the right, and there's podcasts on there as well. It'll take you a long time, and it's just really to prompt thought, to, in a way, trigger a little bit, not in a negative way, especially under the Insights tab. But again, start from left to right and keep journaling. Okay, so it's to keep things going during the week, from session to session, or to determine whether or not this is actually true. And could you possibly have parts? Okay. The next is more of my more research training site, and that is churchprotect.org. So that has some of my own, well, all my own work, but under the truths tabs, you'll see more of my clinical work. Plus, with that one under Insights, if you want to know what I do on social media, that's become my Dropbox. Because at any point in time, I always know I'm going to get kicked off of social media. So you can see from month to month. Or if you want to kind of see what I'm doing, if you actually don't want to go onto my Twitter page, you can kind of see. I try to choose some of the more thought-provoking ones. And then the last one is a real area of concern, is about the trans movement, because the trans movement is a predator's playground, okay, because it has to do with dumbed down intuition. So it's called Unmasking the Trans Movement. We're just getting back up and running. Brad Wilder, our wonderful producer who has 40 years of broadcast experience, he's the real deal. He volunteers his time. I volunteer my time. He had a severe heart attack a couple of months ago. We're going to begin recording again, so in a couple of days. So we're going to slowly get back up and running with that. We have a Bitchute channel entitled the same thing, and we have a YouTube channel where you can find actually probably a few more of the most recent ones. There we go. So Scott Nugent was the last recording that we did. So that was a couple of months ago. One way you can help us is get word out. You can see we have very few subscribers, but don't let that confuse you with the quality of the information. It kind of saddens me. It doesn't discourage me, but if people understood what they have access to, we should have millions of subscribers. Every parent, every church, every decent school. Okay, these are clinical interviews. These are content-driven. So I personally line up these interviews, or the majority of them. Dr. Ann Gillies is my co-host. She has a PhD. She's written a number of books. And so if you want fact-based information, this is the best place that I know of online. So it's sad we only have how many? Less than 400. So this is a labor of love. So if you scroll through it, I mean, it's just outstanding information. So I encourage you, if you want to get word out. So we have physicians, we have clinicians, we have subject matter experts on that site. And again, predators love the trans movement. They love it's second to only churches, and that's why there's churchprotect.org. There's a blog that I haven't really written for a while, but the content's excellent. But it is survivorsupport.us. So you can get there either through this or directly to Survivor Support US. What you see with that link is it comes up in order of how many people, how many views. And that's one of the primary ones that are on there about the trans movement, and the rest a lot on predators because of my work with sex offenders. So those are the 3 sites, and then my YouTube channel. And that has a smattering of everything I do, including us, Emma. So if somebody wants a brief version of what we've done in the past 2, they can go to mine. But again, if they want the full deal, that's where they want to stay on your channel. So if you only have a limited amount of time, you can go to mine. But if you want the full entire interview, go to yours. So the different things I do, so you can see I posted one, the most recent one of ours, and then all of a sudden you can see 3 on imprecatory prayers. That is my podcast that I do on Friday nights called Journey to Healing. And you can access that under the podcast tab of survivorsupport.net. That is really one of the things that's also near and dear to my heart because it is important counseling concepts. So I really encourage everybody to go listen to those. I'm doing a series on forgiveness, what it is versus what it is not. Emphasis on what it is not. And then, I'm up to like 25, but there's going to be about 50 episodes. That's about 50 hours of teaching on forgiveness, okay, because it's such an important issue. But then the rest is on boundaries. And that is the other issue. So it all comes down to boundaries and what happens when I have people that have crossed my boundaries. Who do I have to forgive, or when is it appropriate? So you can see the smattering of different things. It's a repository on my YouTube channel. There we go. Those are some of the resources.
It's terrific. And then Jon's Twitter also at Uhler_Jon. Jon posts every podcast that he does. He posts all the latest articles, whether it's for the trans movement, for survivors, for therapy. He calls out a lot of people on here too, so you can kind of see.
I do. As a matter of fact, if you want to scroll down, I hit the furries again.
Oh yeah, you did today.
Yeah, someone forwarded me, right? And I need to put the link, but if you go, I'd never heard of that. So hot off the press, this was today. Rowanyer, ROANYER.com. Oh my gosh. Oh, there's a live chat person. Isn't that special? So I'll probably have to put the link up, but as a matter of fact, the screenshot, if you click on that, it should say rowaner.com. There we go. Look at that. Furry fandom, a bunch of deviants. So you can chat with them. Oh, I can only imagine what that one's like. Right? Who's manning that? What is this? So it just shows you it's so deviant. So by their own admission, when they do their own research, right? Yeah. It's bad news. So what adults want to do, have at it, but don't go after minors. But you watch all the furry fandom. You would think if they're legitimate, they would be the first ones to say, you know what, this adult only. We don't want kids. But no, you say they're not appropriate to minors and they get all agitated. Well, now they've just revealed what they're all about. So if you want to be deviant, just like if you want to be a drag queen, stay in the club, be a drag queen. I don't care. But don't start reading to little kids in libraries. Don't go to schools because there's only one reason. You notice you're not going to old folks' homes reading. Okay, so if you want to be a furry, but be adult enough to say we're not appropriate for kids. You watch that. Watch how agitated they get. So also with porn, you watch the people that defend porn, and they all start to go together. So we cannot compromise, by the way, on the issue of safeguarding. And men that are into all this stuff, they're into porn. And porn does a number on male minds. And that's why any survivor needs to know it wasn't about them. I mean, they're not the reason for their abuse. These are deviant adults, deviant men that were porn fueled. And even before porn, there was deviance, but you won't find any sex abuser now, sex offender, that's not into porn. So survivors need to know that they were not the cause of their abuse. And if it wasn't them, that the perps would have found another kid. So there we go.
Amen. And I encourage you guys, if you guys want, if you guys are on Twitter, please go follow Jon. Like I said, he's constantly posting on there. You guys can keep up with him day to day instead of maybe weekly, just on a podcast where he's talking about a specific topic. His Twitter, he talks about everything under the sun that he's passionate about. So you guys can keep up with all the latest stuff day to day and daily. His YouTube channels are fantastic. As you guys can see, there were so many videos on there for you guys, absolutely for free, which is fantastic, and on his website under the insights tabs and on his blog, and you guys can access the podcast there as well. But there are so many hours of content on his survivor support website also, and I'm going to have that in the show notes. And Jon, I'm really grateful for you. Thank you so much for coming on again today.
Emma, you're more than welcome. Thank you for this opportunity. It's been the right thing at the right time for me to finally put down in somewhat systematic fashion. I'm aware of the fact I do circumlocution and tangential thinking, but you're to be commended. I encourage everybody to support you. My stuff, I don't have a membership or anything. I'm called to do what I'm called to do. My what I do, full-time therapy, that brings in my income. But I encourage people to support you. You have a number of channels where they can become members. And I really encourage that because bless your heart, right? You're doing this for free. And when I've seen how many years and how many episodes you've produced, so I want to commend you and I want to encourage any viewer to go to you've got a number of ways that people can support you. You always talk about that at the very beginning, but seriously, people need to sign up. Just know they're supporting you and will help you keep doing what you're doing. So that's my plug for you.
Thanks, Jon. That goes both ways. We are all in this together. We all have our piece to the puzzle, and I'm so grateful that we can collaborate our puzzle pieces together and create a really cool series for people to follow. So this is awesome. It's really fun to have these reoccurring episodes. When I first started this podcast, that was one of the things I was passionate about, was sort of taking a concept from like a TV show where people get to know a guest, because that was always something that I always disliked about podcasts. You'd hear an amazing guest and then you wouldn't hear from them again for another couple years. And I'm like, you need to bring that person on again, So I try to do that as much as possible with people. I think it's good to have something ongoing, something to build on, different topics to explore deeper than maybe just, an hour to 3 hour episode. There's so much more that we can do when we're consistently working together. So this is really awesome. I'm learning so much from you. I know everybody else is. Everybody, please go support Jon. Go check out his content. He has so many hours of free content for you guys. Free therapy, essentially, especially great for those of you who maybe aren't ready for therapy or therapy curious and just want to get to know sort of what to expect and, take some notes on different questions to ask your therapist and just to understand the journey that you'll be going on. And obviously to recognize if your therapist is not taking you down that journey and that maybe you need to find a different therapist. So there's so much good that Jon is producing for us. If you're an ally, please go check out also the trans movement content that he creates. This is something that impacts everybody. A lot of people want to look away from that topic too, and it's really important. It's affecting our kids more than ever, and it is horrific, all the different ways that perverted adults are infiltrating society to get access to kids right in plain view, and we need to nip that in the butt, you guys. So please go subscribe. I'll have all of Jon's links below. I'll have all my links below. I'm so grateful for you guys and all your support. We couldn't do this without you. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.
Hello, America. What's your stockbroker done for you lately? Here's what we're doing. 540% last year. You want to see what that looks like? CarnivoreTrading.com/pro. Daily stock alerts, real-time stock analysis, right to your phone, right through the app. And you'll get weekly live calls with our pro traders. Nobody's doing that. You'll get 2 weeks free. Use the promo code YouTube and you'll get 50%